All right, coming back at you. So now we have different aspects of people. Now, I told you I was going to tell you about the phenotype classifications. We have one that's called Negroid. We have one that's called Caucasoid, and we have one that's called Mongoloid. Now, these are false scientific connotations. All right, science has done away with using them. But what's happened is those scientific statements have bled over into the civilian community. So now when we say Mongoloid, it has two meanings. It has the one phenotypical original meaning, but it also for us means people that we associate with Asians. When we say Negroid, it has two meanings. One is the phenotypical classification, and the other one is the social explanation. We think of black people. And the last one, and to me the most confusing one, is the one we call Caucasian. And you all understand, just like the other two, how there was a scientific term that's now no longer used, but it bled over into the civilian community, and now civilians community uses it. So if I said a Caucasian person, 99.9% of you are going to think that that's a white person. But let me explain to you why that's an erroneous claim. Okay. Caucasian, the root word is caucus, and that's a location. So that terminology is relating not to a person or a people, but to a location. Okay. Now, before those people were in that location, they still had those characteristics. So before a Caucasian went to the Caucasus Mountains, he still had the characteristics that we call Caucasian, which is the shape of the skull morphology. That existed before they went to the Caucasus regions. So you could have Caucasian people in Africa, because Africa has the largest biodiversity of humans on the planet, that continent. So Caucasians existed before people went to the Caucasus Mountains and before white people. Now, we got the name from that place, but they existed with or without the name. A rose is still a rose, no matter what you call it. If you look at the skull morphology, that skull morphology is more ancient than humans migrating to that area. But since we associate the people with that area, we gave it the name Caucasian. So Caucasian does not mean white, contrary to what you believe. And remember, Caucasians been around a lot longer than white people. White people, how long have they only been around? We already discussed this. White skin developed between 8 and 10,000 years ago. So there were no white people before 8 to 10,000 years ago. Therefore, there were no, in the terms that we use Caucasians before that time. But was that skull morphology a human aspect? Did people in Africa have that? Did people in Africa migrate out of Africa with that skull morphology? Yes. So were there Caucasians in Europe? Yes. Were they white? No. Were there Caucasians in North Africa? Yes. Are there still today? Yes. Are there Caucasians in Ethiopia? Yes. Are they white? No. The white people evolved in the Caucasus region, and the last evolutionary development was the white skin, and it's only 8,000 years ago. So remember, we had a physical development and change, what makes people different, which also affects their biological development and change. The DNA changes, the haplogroups of their blood change. Now, these are just slight changes, but over time and over distance and variations, you get distinct groups. But we're still of the same species, which means we can still interbreed. So we're all still human or humanoid, but we're different. White people and Asian people have a higher percentage of Neanderthal and Denisovan, of Neanderthal than black people do, up to sometimes 10%. Some white people have 10% Neanderthal genetics, and Asians also. There are a group of black people who have Denisovan genetics, and that Denisovan genetics also bled over into Asians. Now, we talked about Caucasus Mountains being an area and a location, and Caucasian not meaning white. Caucasian refers to a scientific term that is no longer used, and that's the skull morphology, the shape of the skull. You can look at the skull and tell it's a Caucasian skull. Does not mean it's a white person's skull, because these skeletons are older than white people were. So remember, Caucasian does not mean white. Caucasian is related to Caucasus, which is a place and not a race. This is your boy Key, coming back at you talking about Asians. Stay tuned.